Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. McLaren have responded to Max Verstappen's recent title charge, claiming they expect to bounce back in the upcoming rounds given the strength of their car, but also making it very clear they will not be choosing a favourite and selecting a number one driver between now and the end of the season unless it becomes mathematically impossible for one of their drivers to win the championship. This could well be news to Max Verstappen's ears. Which driver might they favour if they absolutely have to? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, plenty to get into today. We're going to start here. The Mexican Grand Prix is coming up in a couple of days' time. Sergio Perez will be back in Mexico next year, driving with Cadillac, of course. And this weekend, there's a lot to say. So Pirelli have done it again. Last year, the compounds, C3, C4, C5. This year, the hard tyre is instead going to be a C2. So the compounds overall are actually harder this year than they were before. Now, typically, Mexico is a pretty easy one-stop. I guess the idea is if you're going to one-stop, so the C3, C4 will definitely do you a one-stop. The idea, I guess, for Pirelli is if you make it a C2, C4 hard medium, then that will be a slower overall race time on the harder tyre, which maybe means going for a two-stop C4, C5, C5 is more possible. That's the theory. But in Austin, it backfired spectacularly. Nobody used the hard, but they still one-stopped anyway. And I wouldn't say that was impossible either this upcoming weekend. George Russell has some thoughts on that we'll get to in a second. There are, however, 9 drivers in FP1 that will be making a change. So we know that the teams need to do their mandatory rookie practice sessions. Mexico is often chosen as a good track because there's plenty of runoff area if they have a bit of a moment. So Luke Browning is going to be in Carlos Sainz's Williams, Jack Crawford in Lance Stroll's Aston Martin, Raya Hirakawa in Ollie Behrman's Haas. We know that there was a lot of talk recently about paying McLaren a bit of money to get a test drive with them. Paul Aron will be in Gasly's Alpine. 4 more to come as well. Actually, an additional one on that, 5 more. Ayumu Iwasa will be in Liam Lawson's Racing Bull. We've got Pato Award in for Lando Norris, Fuoco in for Hamilton, Vesti in for Russell, and Lindblad in for Verstappen. So I don't think the drivers stepping out will mind too much. The one thing that you may note here is that, okay, hang on a second, if O'Ward is in for Norris, then what's going on with Oscar? And, well, Oscar Piastri has only done one session without, I think it was Dunn, wasn't it, who came in earlier in the year for Lando and for Oscar. But Oscar still needs to step out of one more session. This probably will be happening in Abu Dhabi because if you look at the upcoming rounds, they wouldn't do it as sprint round, obviously. So that takes Brazil and Qatar out of the equation. And are you going to put a rookie in Las Vegas? It's a strange type of circuit. Probably not. And maybe Piastri will like this because it means he gets 3 whole sessions in Mexico to get up to speed, right? Where he wants to be, given that he's struggled the last couple of weekends. But equally, it's clearly not ideal that Piastri, in a race that will almost certainly at this point decide the championship, right? It's very unlikely that the championship will be decided before Abu Dhabi. Even if Max makes a storming charge back and leads the championship by Abu Dhabi, he's not going to be leading it by 25 or more points, you would imagine. Oscar could, but on recent evidence, probably not. Seems unlikely for Lando to make that kind of a gap either by the final race of the year. So almost certainly this championship will be decided in Abu Dhabi. How close it is there and what the leading driver will need to do to secure that, that's a different question. But it's quite likely that Piastri will be turning up to that weekend with not exactly an ideal scenario. If he's out of the car for the first practice session, what if whoever they put in the car crashes it and they've got to fix his, you know what I mean, right? Now, Abu Dhabi, of course, again, there's a fair bit of runoff. It should be fine. We've seen rookies do sessions there with no issues before, but it's one thing to think about, right? Because there's going to be so much pressure that weekend, almost certainly in Abu Dhabi, if it is going to be a title decider. And Piastri will not be maybe in an ideal spot, especially given that Lando had a phenomenal drive around there last year, and Max Verstappen has won a fair few times as well. Piastri, that's not quite the case. Now, speaking of Raya Hirakawa, actually, in the Haas, this was yesterday. He was in a Haas doing some testing at Zandvoort of all tracks, which was a little interesting. If you're going to do some TPC testing, I don't know if Zandvoort's the best track for it, because if you do spin out, there's not much runoff, and that's what we see here. Hirakawa spins out, and he's into the wall. It looks like he's going to get away with it, but he hits the wall and smashes up the rear. Not ideal. Also, will say it's a bit of a strange place to crash, really, because, of course, this is coming up to kind of middle of the second sector. This is that really fast right-hander. It's possible to lose it on the entry, right, to this corner. If you take a bit too much curb, you can lose the rear here. But he doesn't lose the rear. He still has the rear. He still has the rear. He still has the rear. And he loses the rear here. So the car kind of goes away from it in a kind of strange spot when... Because usually after you get through that corner, you'd think you could be pretty much flat. And then obviously there's a bit of braking involved for the next kind of corner complex you can see here, but he wouldn't have been on the brakes to lock the rears at that point. So you don't often see crashes there, right? We've seen a fair few crashes around Zandvoort, but you're not often, it's definitely one of the stranger spots to crash on the track, is to lose the rear in the way that he did. So that was all rather strange, I thought. And anyway, Hirakawa was crashed and he will be back in the car in Mexico in a couple of days. Not ideal though for Haas. The reason why it's happening is because Toyota Gazoo Racing, they've got the partnership with Haas. They are trying to give their drivers a good go. And is it really working right now? Possibly not. But maybe we will still have a Japanese driver on the grid next season with Yuki Tsunoda. So it does seem like since Laura Marquez has come into the team, they have been less keen to just sack Yuki off at the first time of asking. And even Helmut Marko says this. He had a good start because, to be fair, Yuki didn't qualify very well in either the sprint or the main Grand Prix, but he gained about 17 places across the two events. Marko says he was competitive when we had clean air. There's an upward trend. He's stabilizing. There's an important, fight for the world championship going on, which, to be fair, he is helping with, at least in the constructors. They're very close now to potentially even coming second in the constructors this year, Red Bull, obviously carried by Max. But Yuki scoring points here or there has been helpful. He was 6th in Baku, which was respectable. 7th in Austin was, it's not great, obviously, and the car has clearly got better. But, it's not totally tragic, I guess. It's still solid points. And even Marko said, because everyone thinks that they're going to make the decision after Mexico, but when asked about that by Auto Racing, he said, that's not our priority to make a decision. Generally, that's what we're planning, to delay the decision. Let's see to what extent we can decide then. So it seems like they're a bit more positive about Yuki now. I still don't think they will keep him. I think they're probably going to bring in Hadjar anyway. But that's kind of how it goes, right? The Red Bull has clearly got better. So Yuki's starting to score points. And now it looks like, wow, Yuki's improved a lot. He's getting to grips with the car. He's still not doing a stellar job. And he's not helping Max much. It's not like he's in the fight to fend off rivals. Although in Baku, to be fair, him fending off Lando could prove to be critical when we look back at this championship overall. So that's the Yuki Tsunoda piece. This is what I was quickly talking about with regard to George. We know that things have been very hectic in the first corners of recent Grand Prix. The sprint in Austin was, I know it was mainly Piastri's doing, I think, but largely surprising because typically in a sprint, everyone keeps themselves to themselves, don't damage the car because you've got qualifying later, right? That's kind of the theory. But actually, turn 1 is so important now because the cars are more difficult to overtake. And there was some discussion on that from Mercedes that they believe, it was the case in the sprints, that when George was seconds behind Max, his tyres are a bit older than Max's, but he could hold his own, he could keep up. But when he was stuck behind Piastri, anytime he got within Piastri's dirty air, there was just no chance. Even if George was quicker than Piastri, there was no way to overtake. And that's around a track where overtaking is absolutely possible, like the Circuit of the Americas. So George says that modern Formula 1 now, a lot of it, I think, is to do with the Pirelli tyres, the way they have to be managed and all these other issues. Dirty air is a major factor. Hopefully there can be some progress made there in 2026. But Russell says, look, it's a race to turn 1 nowadays. That is what we are doing. And once you're there, then good luck, right? Russell gets out of turn 1 ahead in Singapore. He has no doubt he's going to win the Grand Prix. Similar story in, of course, Canada, where he won earlier in the season. And to be fair, Ferrari and Fred Vasseur have pretty much said this all season, that we are in a qualifying championship. And if you had to bet on which driver will be qualifying ahead over the coming rounds, you're going to think Max Verstappen, because I do think the McLaren might still be a faster race car in the race on the Sunday, the preservation of the rear tyres, among other things. But I do believe that Red Bull, certainly with Max in the car, but I do think the Red Bull, just full stop, is now very quick over a single lap. And if Max will just stick it on pole for the coming rounds, good luck getting past Max, especially when he's in a championship battle. He will not let anyone pass easily, and I do think that he should be the favourite for pole basically every weekend now. The question is he favourite for the championship? I just thought this was interesting, kind of like a collection of what the market generally thinks. I think this is on Polymarket or something, but I just thought it was remarkable looking at these graphs, right? Because let's say back in end of June, that's where George Russell got a slight tick up after what happened in Canada. But of course, it was the Canadian Grand Prix when we saw that dip, right, for Lando, when he crashed into Oscar. Oscar then was kind of firmly at that point the title favourite. Then we got the big moment in September, the start of September, when the Dutch Grand Prix happened. Lando's chances dropped from about 40% down to about 20%. Then at the start of October, Baku came round, Oscar had a bad weekend, and all of a sudden Lando was back up to kind of like 30%. And then over the coming weeks, so that's when we first started talking about this Max Verstappen title charge, really. Max's chances were considered then to be roughly 10%, and they've pretty much stayed there until Austin, when Oscar's chances have gone from 65% or so down to 35 in a matter of days. Max is at 33, Lando's at 30. So effectively, according to some, you might as well toss a coin however many times you'd need to do that to work out. Basically, throw a dice, and if it's one or two, then it's one of the drivers. You know what I'm saying, right? It's effectively equal chances. Now, the perception of the community feels somewhat different. This was actually a poll that the race did on their channel. 57% of respondents voted Max. And I think you guys would probably feel somewhat similarly here. Like, I personally feel more aligned with this. I think it's very much like thirds, pretty much. But I can definitely see the logic that says, look, Max is absolutely on a charge. The momentum is very much in his favour. I can totally see the logic for him being the championship favourite right now. And I understand why I think the majority of fans would probably say that he is the championship favourite right now. But 40 points is still a lot, and 26 points to Lando is a lot, especially because Lando is considered by the community, let's say, rather than by the markets, as by far the third favourite. I think that's actually far from the reality right now. I think it's a lot closer to third, as we have seen. And look, if you go back to the pre-2014 Mercedes, Hamilton, Red Bull, Verstappen domination, you used to see titles won with seasons like this. Now, I'm not going to say that Lando's going to do it, but to Lando's credit, yes, he has got and has deserved some significant amount of criticism this season, but he has become the first ever McLaren driver to have 15 podiums in a year for a reason. And yes, is it a spectacular graphic, right? I mean, we look at it on the left-hand side, first, second, third, fourth, second, first, second, Canada, first, second, first, the Dutch Grand Prix, right, Zandvoort, where that wasn't his fault. Baku is kind of the big outlier here, really. If you look at, without the DNFs, and okay, in Canada he wasn't going to be on the podium quite anyway, and in Zandvoort he would have been second. Baku was pretty bad, given that, you know, obviously Oscar had a terrible weekend, and he probably needed to do better there, certainly in qualifying. Maybe he could have taken more of a risk in the Grand Prix. That was kind of an outlier. But since then, third, second, like, he's comfortably been the best McLaren driver since the summer break. And if his final, let's say he podiums every Grand Prix from now to the end of the season and wins a couple in there as well, then that would be a run of form that pre-2014 would have been a title-winning kind of performance. Now, of course, it could, maybe should be argued that in what has been the best car for the majority of the season, this should look somewhat different, but it's still solid consistency, I would say, from Lando when we look back at the season. And that's when McLaren have been called into question, because Oscar Piastri currently leads the Drivers' Championship by 14 points over Lando Norris. The team has been questioned, do you need to favour Oscar? This has been a question for some time now because Oscar leads, Max is clearly very much so a threat, so should you just favour Piastri, back him to the hilt and try and hold off Verstappen by any means necessary? Now, first of all, even if you ask Lando to do that, he's not going to do it if he's got any salt, which I imagine that he at least does to a certain extent. And then they're talking about Piastri's form because, as I mentioned yesterday, there have been rumours that they were looking at his car to make sure that everything's okay. We are currently checking that we are fully satisfied with the car's setup, the floor setup, and that everything is in line from a technical point of view. It kind of feels like after the crash in the sprints that maybe they felt like they'd not repaired the car properly or something, but Oscar's pace in the race was pretty similar to his lack of pace in qualifying, and that was also true in sprint qualifying as well. So it seemed like it was more down to the driving. That's what Andrea Stella says as well, that we'll be looking into Oscar's driving and why his, let's say, skill set didn't suit that weekend quite so well. But there's a couple of fascinating things here. I've seen some people say that this is somehow proof that McLaren are sabotaging Oscar and that they're, I don't know, like messing with his car or his floor or something to turn the title in Lando's favour. I don't know. I understand that McLaren have messed around so much with their puppeteering that I feel like fans that are saying these things, I almost kind of get where they're coming from, but like there's just no way, right? Like they've given Lando some repercussions for crashing into Oscar in Singapore, which was a racing incident by their own admission. And now some people think that they're sabotaging Piastri's car to like self-sabotage their own driver somehow for Lando to win while Max is still a threat. I don't buy any of that, right? But like it should just be a duel to the championship from now on. And that's what McLaren say that it is. But Mexico, it should be a good track for them, but historically it's a great track for Max, right? I mean, Rosberg won in 2016, Rosberg won 2015, Hamilton 2016. Then Max won a couple of years, took a year off. Then he won for another few years, took a year off with Sainz. So the pattern would be that Max is going to win again this year, if you believe in the patterns, I suppose. But McLaren say, actually, no, we have good tracks coming. So there's a pretty interesting quote from Andrea Stella. He said, 5 races and 2 sprints to go means that we can also increase the gap to Max, which is kind of not what we'd have expected. The point is, by many, okay, how do you limit the damage, right? You've got a lead. Max is probably going to close in the lead, Oscar, Lando, but maybe you can hold on. But Andrea Stella says, yeah, we can just increase the gap. And now, pretty funny because it echoes a little bit of, if you guys remember Mattia Binotto, I think it was Budapest 2022, and he said, there is no reason that we cannot win the final 10 Grand Prix of the year. And how many did they win again of those final 10? I think it was 0. So it wasn't a great run. But I don't know if it's going to be a similar story here for McLaren. But they say that they've got good tracks to come. But Singapore was meant to be a great track for them compared to Max. Max beat both McLarens in Singapore. Austin was probably always going to be a Max track, and McLaren were going to be close, and they were pretty good as well. But Max still beat both of them there. So it's interesting. You look at the upcoming tracks, and yeah, there's reason to believe that they should be good for McLaren, but there's no reason to believe they should be any better for McLaren with respect to Red Bull than the previous rounds have been. And as I say, Max, I think, is now the favourite for pole, at least, basically every weekend. And if he gets pole every weekend, he's probably going to convert, given what we've said with Russell and the state of racing right now, a vast majority of those poles. And if he does, I mean, that championship lead can very quickly vanish. Now, Andrea Stella was therefore quizzed, what are you going to do? Lando's only 26 points ahead, Oscar's 40. That's quite a lot, right? If Max gains 7 points on Oscar, because Oscar's second every weekend and Max is first, even if the same story in the sprints, that's not going to be enough. 5 times 7, 35, 2 sprints. Let's say that's 2 more points if Oscar's second and Max is first. So the title is not technically in Max's hands. He can't just win everything and guarantee the win. So you could argue, well, Lando should make sure that he's only third and Oscar's second and all that. Now, that's never going to happen. And the team admits it's never going to happen. Some have asked them to back a driver. I think doing so either way would be foolish. Piastri is not on good form. Yes, he's the leader, but you can't really back him. He doesn't feel like the stronger of the 2 McLaren drivers right now. Many would say he's still favoured over Lando, and I get that logic, but I think it's more 50-50, certainly between the 2 McLarens before you add the Max factor. So Andrea Stella says we are not going to close the door unless it is closed by mathematics. So unless they turn up to Abu Dhabi and one of their drivers is mathematically out of the equation, which could happen, right? Like, let's say Oscar really turns it around, Lando has a crash with Max or something, I don't know, and all of a sudden Lando's out of the picture, Oscar's 24 points ahead of Max, and Lando's 26 points behind going into Abu Dhabi, then sure, in that scenario, they would like to use Lando to at least make sure that Oscar can close out the championship. But in any other scenario, even with 2 rounds to go, if there's a 45-point gap, they are going to say, well, mathematically, it's still possible, so we're going to stick with it. So that's McLaren's take. Is it going to come back to bite them? But frankly, it's not about McLaren anymore, right? It's about the 2 men in the cockpit and whether they can deliver the job to hold off Max Verstappen. Of course, the team has a part to play in that, and I do think the way the team has cocked around this season has not helped their case in terms of trying to micromanage so much about their drivers. But the reality is it's going to be a hell of a title fight from now to the end of the year. So tweet your thoughts in the comments. I guess the one final piece, as I've mentioned a few times, could we get another car or team that actually start mixing things up? We know that last year was great for Ferrari in Mexico, and after the analysis in Austin, this was actually the best pace that Ferrari have ever had this year. They were only a 10th off Max. So the feeling is that maybe Mexico, they could also be a serious force. I'm expecting Mercedes, at least at one of the coming rounds, to look pretty good again. So very much into your thoughts, as always, and all this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.